For the next 30 minutes, we'll be exploring how shame plays a role in our relationships, particularly in places like school. I hope that you'll let this be a very brief introduction to something that will be explored in much more detail at the Maximizing Emotional Connections Conference in Fort Worth, Texas, October 14th through 17th, and that this may spur some interest in learning more. My background has been, though I have worked around churches and in churches for the last 20 years, I was a religion undergrad, thinking of going into the ministry, but changed into psychology and sociology later in my undergrad, and then did graduate work in psychology and licensed as a professional counselor. And so I have run counseling programs, basically, in most of the churches that I've worked around. And in my own private practice, I have really encountered a lot of things. And when I thought about what I would share with you this morning, I was trying to think what it is about my journey that could have any resonance or something that would be maybe helpful for your journey. And I thought, in my journey, I guess, like most counselors, it's a little different from most people. So I spend a lot of time listening. I spend a lot of time listening to all kinds of different people. I've counseled secretaries and teachers. I've counseled strippers and preachers. I've worked with homeless people, and I've worked with brain surgeons. And in the course of that, I think in my own process, I have continued to ask the questions, what is it that people need? What is it that they're hungry for? What is it that they're seeking, in the counseling office? What are they looking for? And what do they need to help make life somehow more whole, more full? What do we all need? That's been my quest for a long time. And, if I think about what it is that I might have to share with you today, it would probably be something about what I've learned in that process. And probably the most central piece of that I could share with you would be some things that I've learned most recently, in the last 5 or 6 years, from the works of Sylvan Tompkins and a psychiatrist named Donald Nathanson, another named Vic Kelly, most of whom up in the Northeast continue to work. Nathanson and Vic Kelly continue to work with clients in Philadelphia. Tompkins, now deceased, but his writings have become the thing that have really opened my eyes to some new things that I think bear sharing with you. And so what I'm going to share with you today may be a little bit more psychological than what I have shared with you in the past, but I thought maybe that's probably what's most important. Because when I think about what people are hungry for, what people are needing in our world today, and what are the ills that are causing so much dysfunction or problems in our world today, the insights that I've had most recently that have been most profound for me are coming from this work. And so I have a question for you as a way to begin. What do you do when you are embarrassed or humiliated? What do you do? I want to tell you why that's an important question. The question, what do you do when you feel humiliated, I have begun to recognize as being one of the core issues that we're facing in the world today. And it's been the work of Tompkins and Nathanson that have helped me see some of this. Don Nathanson, this psychiatrist who's spent more of his life and his work studying humiliation and shame than probably anyone else on the planet, has been able to discover is that shame, which I'm not talking about guilt here, I'm talking about something more like embarrassment, that it is Well, it is one of 9 basic biologically functioning affects, or what we call kind of the biological component of our emotions. We're all born with these. You know, we're born with something that shows up on our face. This is what Sylvan Tompkins discovered. He discovered that babies, when they come out of the womb and they cry, don't have to be thinking about anything. There's a biological mechanism. You don't have to teach a child how to make tears. When we cry, we just cry. And the face and the body know how to do that. It's a biological program. But what Tompkins began to recognize was that these biological programs, over the course of our life, become scripted by the experiences of life. And so, though we may all be born with 9 of these biological affects, these become scripted across the course of our life by our life experience. If you get raised in a family like I did, where if you cried, as soon as your lip began to tremble or your chin began to tremble, somebody would say, "Oh, don't be a baby." Then you learn that that is one of the biological experiences in your life that you will have to hide and cut short. You'll have to somehow push it down. Pretend it's not there. Stop paying attention to it. Other people, not given that kind of experience, might freely cry. But each of our biologically gifted experiences of emotion, these affects, are there for a particular purpose and give us some advantage when we pay attention to them in terms of understanding what's going on in us and around us. Shame is one of these. You know easily how to recognize when a baby is feeling distress and they begin to cry, right? We see that, we hear that, and we go and we respond to it. We don't tend to pick up quite as easily on when people are experiencing shame and humiliation. What Tompkins saw in the baby was a facial display, a bodily response to anything that impeded their interest or enjoyment that looked like this. The baby might be looking at something, and then something would impede that, and the baby would do this. And they look kind of confused. We also talk about the blush of the cheeks when we're embarrassed. You don't have to teach yourself how to do that, do you? These are biological mechanisms that we're all born with. But what's interesting about Nathanson's work is what he's begun to recognize over the last 30 years of his study is that when people experience these affects and they become scripted, these become kind of the basics of how they encounter life. They really impact how we pay attention to different things. And when it comes to shame, our avoidance of it, our need to deny it, can have an incredible impact on everything we do. He's even developed something called the compass of shame and understanding how people develop scripts to deal with shame. And what I'm going to share with you briefly is something that I could spend hours and hours and hours exploring with you. But I do this only mainly as an introduction so that perhaps you can see how what we're talking about here could be really important to what happens in schools, in families, and every community. In fact, what I'm going to suggest is that what we're talking about here is something at the core of almost all the violence that happens in our society. And there is something we can do about it. What Nathanson found was that the 4 scripts that people develop around those moments when they feel shame and humiliation can become lifelong patterns, and that even communities can kind of have this as one of these scripts as their main way of dealing with things. And they help. All of these scripts kind of help us in that moment where we feel embarrassed or we feel shame. They help us kind of get away from the feeling and escape it. But they also can become a trap in which more shame is created. And I'll explain that.